Hi, my name is Adam Silver, and today I'm going to take you through a presentation that I've called Product Management Stories from the Front Lines and Lessons Learned. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, here we go. So, the first topic is what I just call vision, and I want to tell you a couple of stories from a company that I worked at many years ago in the UK called VideoLogic. They were one of the first companies to build digital video products for PCs. And VideoLogic had a very awesome visionary leader, the CEO or managing director named Tony McLaren. And this is in the mid 80s. So I'm showing my age a little bit here, but mid 1980s. And Tony created a presentation which sort of we knew as the presentation about the four convergent industries. And he went around to all of our corporate customers and he gave this presentation. And bear in mind, this is before the internet. This is before digital video on the internet. This is before a lot of the technologies that we've taken for granted today. And he talked about the converging of computers, television, telecommunications, and publishing. And it was a really visionary presentation, and it was way, way, way ahead of its time. And it was delivered in such a way that described what the experience would be in the future. And here we are in the future now. And I look back on that presentation and I think about how accurate it was. So that's Tony McLaren. And then Douglas Adams is a name that you may know. Douglas was the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and many other wonderful literary pieces. And during my time at VideoLogic, I actually met him and helped him a little bit with some technology that he was working on for a television program that was aired in the UK by the BBC. And the program was called Hyperland, and it was a 30-minute documentary that painted a vision of what technology would be like in the future. And in true Douglas Adams style, it was quite comical in nature. I found a copy of Hyperland on YouTube, and there's a link to it later in the deck. And if you're interested in seeing what we thought the future would be like back in the mid 1980s, it's certainly an interesting TV program to watch. So those are my two stories about vision. And also at GoPro in the developer program. Well, I worked at GoPro more recently, and that was a wonderful experience where I had the opportunity to start some new initiatives for the company. And if you know GoPro, you'll know that they make video cameras for action sports. And one of the things that we really were trying to do at GoPro was to figure out ways to diversify our business. And the GoPro Developer Program was a pathway to do that, to diversify the use cases and to present new market opportunities to the company. And I was able to build a team and explain the vision that we had for the program, which basically was to work with other companies with expertise in their market areas and use developer tools to enable those companies to connect their products to GoPro products to deliver new market experiences. And we did that. And we launched the GoPro Developer Program in 2016, and we had 35 developers at our launch event. And at that time, we had over 300 developers in the program. And it was an incredible experience. And it was another example of where there was a clear vision at the beginning. And we executed to that vision and we delivered that vision. And it was an incredibly gratifying experience. And so, lessons learned. So begin with the end in mind is a wonderful expression that I learned many years ago. It's actually one of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is a Stephen Covey book, which I will reference later. begin with the end in mind captures it perfectly. So if you're starting off with a new idea, try to visualize exactly how you want the experience to be. And one of the exercises that I did with people in my team and that I did myself was when you're at the early stage of a product concept, it's usually a wonderful experience to sit down and actually write. Imagine that launch day is upon you, however many days, weeks, years, months, or whatever in the future that would be, and sit down and write the press release. You may not be somebody with a corporate communications background, but it doesn't matter. If you're a product manager and you have a vision for how you want your product or your experience to be, it's usually a really good exercise to write the launch press release at the very first stage, because that way you will force yourself to begin with the end in mind. And the other little trick that I use all the time is I do all of my writing on the computer in TextEdit, because and I turn off all the formatting, because one of the things that I've learned is that when you're writing, sometimes you get carried away with the formatting and how you want it to look, and you lose the concept of the actual written word and the content. So that's one of my little tricks that I'll share with you. Very good. And number 2, ask why. It seems obvious, but let me take you through a couple of stories that illustrate this very nicely. So we're going to go from the mid 1980s to the mid 1990s, and this product appeared in the market, and at the time it was absolutely revolutionary. It's the Sony VX1000 DV camcorder. And the reason it was revolutionary is because it did 2 things that were completely different to anything that had come before it in the prosumer space. One of them is that it recorded digitally. And the other thing is that it had an interface on it called Firewire. And Firewire was an amazing interface that was originally created by the folks in the advanced technology group at Apple, and they licensed it out to different companies. And one of the companies they licensed it out to was the company I was working at the time, called Adaptec. And Adaptec was building the computer side of the Firewire interface. And this Sony camcorder was the first device that came on the market that had a Firewire interface. So we wanted to work with it. And when Sony launched this camera in the USA, we tested it, and we were able to receive digital video over the Firewire interface from the camera into the computer. We could edit it, and then we could send the video back over the Firewire interface back to the camera. And we thought this was fantastic. It was revolutionary at the time, because everything prior to that was analog video that had to be digitized in the computer. Anyway, a few months after the US launch, they launched the European version of the product. And much to our dismay, we learned that the Firewire interface was basically one-way only, unidirectional. It sent video from the camera to the computer, but we couldn't send it back to the camera to record back to video. So we dug into this, and I ended up taking a trip to Sony corporate headquarters in Tokyo with a couple of engineers from our group to go and see the head of the Sony consumer camcorder division. And this was, this guy's a really important guy. So there's me and 2 Silicon Valley engineers with me. And we walk into the conference room for the meeting. And it's this long boardroom table with probably 25 chairs around it, 12 on each side, whatever it was. And we sit down in the middle of the table on one side, and then gradually about like the entire other side of the table got filled up with senior executives from the group at Sony. And I started the conversation with the big boss. He was sat across the table from me. And I basically just asked the question, like, why does this camera not receive video like the one in the United States does? And we sort of had a conversation about it, and basically what it came down to was that it was about import duties into Europe. And because the camera was had this interface on it, if it was able to record back to video, it was classified as a tape recorder as opposed to a camera, and the import duties were much higher. Anyway, that meeting was basically a failure. We weren't able to convince Sony to, release a different version of the camera. So, we managed to figure out a way through sort of the hacker community, indirectly, to basically reverse engineer through the interface. There was a little software switch that could be flipped to enable this capability, and it turned out that a student at a university in Israel figured out this, and once it was on the internet, boom, that was it, and everyone was using it. But it illustrates, this illustrates to me, it's a good example of a situation where we could have very easily just said, okay, the European market is not available to us for this video editing experience. We're just going to have to focus on the US, but we didn't. We stuck with it. We asked why. We went to Japan. We ended up, getting this guy, this student in Israel he hacked the interface, and we were able to get around that problem. Okay, next story. Who is this guy? This is John Kaplan, and John was the founder of Flip Video, which what year are we in now? We're in when was it? 2007? Yeah, 2007 is when I joined Flip Video. They've been already going for a few years. And John was a really neat guy, total visionary, much like Tony McLaren and, some of these other CEOs that I've worked with, Nick Woodman at GoPro and others. And I remember one time I think it was at an offsite meeting or something with the senior staff. And John told this amazing story about the recipe book. There was in his family, there was a recipe book with all these traditional family recipes, and the recipe book had been handed down from generation to generation. And in the recipe, there was this recipe for, I think it was pot roast. It was certainly a beef recipe of some kind. And the very first instruction, the very first direction, I guess, for this particular pot roast is you take the pot roast and you cut off 1 inch from the right side and 1 inch from the left side, and then you put it in the pot. And John was making a pot roast one time, and this struck him as a very strange thing to do. So he called around his family members, his more older family members, and he said, hey, do you remember this recipe from way back in our family history? And why? Why does it say you have to cut off, the right side and the left side, 1 inch each side? And eventually, after, talking to many different members of his family, it turned out that the particular pot that his great aunt or whoever it was that wrote the recipe had wasn't a very large pot. And so it was necessary to cut this, to basically waste this food to make it fit in the pot. And he told this story at this offsite, and I asked him to actually come to one of my staff meetings and tell the story to my team, because it was another perfect example of why it's important to not just accept the way things are and to ask why. So here we go, lessons learned. Don't accept the status quo, don't assume this is how it has to be, and ask why. And this is one of my favorite items, is document templates in product management. I've always found to be a little frustrating. Typically what happens, you're a new product manager, you join a company, and one of the first things you do is you go onto the wiki or whatever tool you use, and you go and you download the product requirements documents or the marketing requirements documents or whatever documents you create from the previous people. And you just kind of say, okay, let's just kind of hack through this thing and repurpose it for my new product. And after doing this in a few companies, I realized that it's not a good way of doing it, because it forces your thinking into the typical way of doing things. And when you're a product manager, one of the things that you want to do is you want to bring new ideas and new concepts to a company. So by all means, look at the document templates that are used. But again, I go back to my good old text edit. You know, documents, written documents in the world of product management are so critically important, because they are read by so many different groups in the company, and they help the rest of the company understand what the blazes is coming. You know, what is this new thing that we're making? How is it positioned? You know, who is the target user? Da da da. All of these things. So ask why, you know, if you're not happy with your document templates, create your own document templates. That's what I would advise. Okay, moving on. Okay, so this is a blatant theft of the Apple tagline, think different, from quite a while ago. It was a wonderful, wonderful advertising campaign. And so I've used it here. And one of the very first books that I read in my career, because when I started my career, I was actually in sales for the first 5 years of my career. And my father was a sales guy, and he bought for me this book by a guy named Frank Bettcher. He was a very famous salesman in the United States in the 50s, I think. But this expression is great. Never forget a customer, never let a customer forget you. Basically what it's saying is make an impact, be remembered, do something different that will help people remember who you are, and remember who they are. So a couple of stories that I can share with you from the front lines. At one point in my career, I threw in sort of all of the sort of traditional corporate jobs, and I decided to try and do my own startup. And my startup was a technology startup in the area of motorcycling, which is one of my passions. And I quickly discovered that the US headquarters for Ducati, which is one of the world's leading motorcycle brands, was headquartered in Cupertino, very close to Apple. And I did some research, and I figured out who the CEO of Ducati was in North America. And I contacted him. I called up the office, and I talked to his assistant, and I introduced myself, and I said, you know, I'm doing a startup, a technology startup. I'm looking for people to be on my advisory board, and I'm wondering if you know, I could talk with your CEO and get some time and see if he's interested in joining my advisory board. And being the effective gatekeeper, executive assistant that she was, she, you know, very politely told me to go away. And I was persistent, and I asked her, you know, is he available? Like, you know, is he in the office? And eventually she said to me, look, his wife's just had a baby. You know, he's not going to be in the office for a couple of weeks. He's at home. They've got a new baby. Like, just go away, basically. So I, somewhat dismayed, you know, sat in my home office, and I thought to myself, well, what can I do to be noticed? And I thought, well, the guy's wife's just had a baby. It's a time to celebrate. So I called up my local florist, and I said, look, you know, can you please do me a favor? And I ordered a bouquet of flowers, and I sent them to his office with a little card that said, you know, I'm Adam Silver, and I tried to contact you today, and your assistant told me that you and your wife just have a new baby, and I want to say congratulations. And if you have an opportunity to call me, I'd really appreciate chatting with you. And I put my phone number on the card with the flowers. And some people might accuse me of being a little sleazy, but it was the only thing I could think about. I was like, okay, what can I do to get this guy's attention? Anyway, a couple of days go by, and my phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and much to my utter amazement, it was the CEO of Ducati North America. And he said, you know, what do you want? You know, so I told him, and he said, oh, that sounds quite interesting. Why don't you come in down to my office? And so I did. I went to his office, and I told him the story of what I was trying to do, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm really interested in that. You know, I'd like to be a part of that." And that's how I got the CEO of Ducati to join my advisory board. And it was a fun experience. We didn't, unfortunately, like many startups, it didn't go the distance. But I got to work with the guy. I got to know the guy, and you know, I'm still in contact with him. So, okay. So think different. Lessons learned. Do something different. Stand out from the crowd. And this is another pro tip that I've talked to a lot of product managers after I did my first webinar a few months ago, which I referenced in the notes at the end. You know, there's a lot of folks out there that are excited about the opportunity to be a product manager, and perhaps they're an engineer or they're in marketing or whatever, and they're trying to get a job in product management. And job hunting is very difficult. It's very demoralizing. And one of the things that I've always found works well, because people just don't do it anymore, is to send a handwritten card or letter, and also to send it in a FedEx package, because everyone's deluged with emails and, you know, all this other sort of techno, you know, instant messages and Slacks and and all these other things. And, you know, to get a FedEx package with a letter in it, it's just like, doesn't happen anymore. So it's a great way to stand out from the crowd and to do something different. Okay, so to wrap things up, I would say it's a good opportunity to ask yourself, have you accepted the way things are? And is there anything you can do to enact positive change in your company? And what can you do to be different? How can you stand out from the crowd? Obviously, don't do anything ridiculous, but well, you might say that sending flowers to the CEO of Ducati is ridiculous, but whatever. Do what you got to do to make a difference, and be clear about what your vision is. Understand what you want things to look like when it's all done. And once you've got a clear vision of how you want things to look when it's all done, you'll be able to figure out the steps to get there. Figuring out the steps to get there is the easy part. Figuring out exactly how you want it to look like when it's done is the tough part. And forcing yourself to write a product press release is a wonderful, wonderful way to get clarity around your vision. A few things, a few reference things then, and I think you'll be able to download a copy of this deck through Product School. These are great books that I've read over the years. You might find them a little dated now, but I think some of the concepts in here are wonderful, and I think that you'll enjoy reading them. And then finally, I've given you the link to the Hyperland video by Douglas Adams, which is wonderful. And if you've got a spare, I think it's 30 minutes or 40 minutes, something like that, it's just a wonderful thing to watch. And then my previous webinar that I did with Product School is linked to there as well. Okay, so that's it. I want to say thank you to Product School for hosting this webinar. And I really enjoy providing and sharing this information with you all. And I welcome anyone that wants to contact me if you've got questions after the fact. I enjoy helping people. And enjoy your journey. Thank you very much.